Right, team. It looks like it's the top of the hour. These are 30-minute webinars, so we want to make sure we get started right away. This is the fourth in our series of 5 webinars. My name is Patrick Mann from Eagle Technologies. We're here to talk today about risk analysis, really what we're doing to identify vulnerable workloads and data within our estate, and making sure that we protect that data, remediate it from threats, and really understand what the risk of our data, the risk to our data and of our data is. Mhm. So, little quick introduction. First of all, Dave Heischel, our CEO, has been running these things. He is not here today. He's traveling for work, and we'll be seeing some of our St. Louis customers here at Top Golf if you're in the area this afternoon or this afternoon. But really want to touch base on what Eagle does and what we think of from a holistic standpoint. Really, what we're focused on as an organization is helping our customers maintain a data center, design a data center in depth, making sure that we understand what the data is, where it lives, how it moves, how our applications use it, all of those things with the back of our mind, security and the recovery as the foremost thought when we're starting to design these things, right? This concept of recovery in depth has been something that we've been talking about for quite some time, and it's really starting to kind of take shape from the Commvault message as well. You've heard Commvault talk about cyber resiliency. We've called this a cyber resiliency webinar series, but that recovery in depth functionality, that focus on being able to restore your data in the best format possible is really what we've been focused on for quite some time. And then we design those solutions so that they're interoperable, so that they provide value across the stack and allow us to provide insight and, like I said, value to that data. So that's who we are as Eagle. If you haven't seen this slide before, welcome to the webinar series, I guess. Um, Um, this is a Dave Heischel slide. He put his email on the bottom of this one. I'm going to leave it in here because it really speaks to what we're talking about today. We've been offering this Commvault hardening engagement. We talked a little bit about it in our last webinar series, but really what we're trying to do is identify those cyber threats, the holes in our systems, where we can remediate and mitigate risks within our backup and recovery infrastructure. And we've designed a set of services to ensure that that's happening for our customers.
Yeah, and echoing that depth conversation, it's not just magic check boxes, silver bullets here. This is a in-depth approach, layers of the onion about how we want to secure. Because you think about it, backups are going to be your fallback, and they touch every part of your organization. So very key and critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of that cyber resilience, ensuring that recovery and recoverability is what we're looking to do, and this goes a very long way to help that. We designed these services, we've augmented and changed these services. We have a change management board that meets monthly to make sure that we're staying on top of these best practices. And for our customers that have used the hardening engagement before, we've even gone back and turned new features on as they become available. So that's something that we're really keeping an eye on and making sure that you guys are aware of. Some introductions real quick. Like I said, Dave is not here. He is our president, CEO, fearless leader. Anthony Schweitzer and myself, solutions architects from Eagle. You've seen us on these webinars before. And then we have Alex Stone from Commvault with us today. Alex, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So excited to be here for the team. Just quick intro. I'm a sales engineer here at Commvault. I work with our customers to architect their solutions, really to fit their requirements. And I think this is a really relevant conversation today. First step is, can we protect our data sources? But then the second step is, can we scan that data? Can we gain insights into, risk in that data? Scan it for threats, et cetera. So really excited for this conversation today and happy to be here with the Eagle team.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Really great stuff. Anthony and I were up in New York City for Commvault Shift last week. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to start to talk a little bit about some of the things that we heard because there's some exciting stuff, not only on the risk side, but some of the other stuff like threat scan that we'll talk about in the next iteration of this webinar as well. So really exciting stuff there. Glad that we got a chance to consume some of that stuff, and we'll get a little bit of insight here, I think, today, and definitely next week as we talk through threat scan. Um, right now, though, let's talk about table stakes. Let's talk about what Commvault is bringing to the table from a risk mitigation standpoint out of the box, and really what we're trying to accomplish with that Commvault hardening engagement. These are some of the functions and features that we're engaging with you on to make sure that they're turned on, that they're configured properly, that they're tuned for your environment. Things like anonymous file activity or anomalous file activity is a threshold, right? We need to make sure that those thresholds are relevant and valid for your environments. Um, but things like RBAC and immutability and compliance, like all of these things that we've been talking about to our customers for quite some time, making sure that those things are turned on. These are, for me, from a backup and recovery standpoint, table stakes in this game. This is the bare minimum we need to be doing to ensure that our backup data is protected, right? Then we can use that backup data to provide insight into some of our other use cases, where our data lives, what it contains, and things like that.
Yeah, and you have the end-to-end encryption. Ciphers matter, and that's another thing we're talking internally about what to do, because we have post. Uh, oh my goodness, I can't think of the word. Post-quantum cryptography algorithms now, and so how do we start getting those introduced so that we're ahead of quantum computing and how quickly it can break ciphers? And so again, that forward thinking, how do we constantly keep evolving to make sure that your data is secure even when the threat's not there yet?
Yeah, really good point. And then integrations with your SIM and SOAR products for incident response is another thing that people aren't really maybe not taking advantage of, but being able to tie in our reporting and our APIs into our security suite or into our security environment to provide relevant information to those teams is another thing that Commvault does really well.
Yeah, and on that point, Commvault that shift, they talked a lot about resiliency operations or res ops, and the idea is you know, um, you have backup admins, and it's like I have this job, and a lot of times security, HR, all these other divisions and departments, they don't always intermingle, interplay. And the idea here is again, if you're trying to protect the company, how do you have those, I guess, interdepartment conversations? The RBAC functions that we have, you could lock down these organizations to specific tasks where you can have just a security officer role and they're not touching backups, but they can do some of the other things that need to happen from a security standpoint. So trying to make things simpler, better for the organization where they have their set of tools, but these tools can complement each other, not compete. And
Yeah.
so to that point, the integration with a SIM and a SOAR, I mean, we can send the metrics to that SIM platform, and there can be automatic remediation that can be done if it sees a certain type of event or certain type of anomaly. There's integration as well with like CrowdStrike and other EDR platforms to
Mhm.
help give
Yeah.
visibility to Commvault that maybe there's a compromise. So again, we're talking about not being siloed, but how do we better interact with the tools available in the organization?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Anthony, especially as we discuss the functionalities of this product as it is, right? Risk
Yeah.
analysis is something that we can use as an IT organization, and we're going to discuss it from that standpoint, obviously. But one of the things that we need to also be cognizant of is that these insights are not necessarily IT related either, right? We need to make sure that our compliance teams or our audit teams are read on to the functionalities that we have available to us in a tool like Commvault and specifically in a tool like Commvault Risk Analysis.
Yeah.
So this is actually a slide that we used at our Commvault Tech Forum last year in December. I like to bring some things back because we've been talking about these things. Risk analysis has been around, and we've been ready to bring our customers on board to make sure that they have those insights. But we wanted to kind of put frame what's going on, what's the reason behind risk analysis. What are we analyzing? What is this risk, right? And it's everything from, are you sure your data gets backed up, to do you know where your data is, where it lives, what is sensitive and what is important to your organization?
Yeah, so sprawl is definitely happening. And again, Commvault can be that tool that touches everything, sees everything, and it becomes that single source of truth for things. When you think about, we've talked about this before as well, but if you have an incident, it's not just a matter of, give me my data back, right? It's what did they take and what can they use as blackmail on you? And having better controls from a permission standpoint, where data live, where sensitive data lives, you can be confident of I they got in, but they didn't touch my sensitive data. I don't have to send out a notice to everybody that your data was breached. We could really minimize kind of what that risk looks like and what the cleanup looks like after the fact.
Yeah, good point. Alex is going to do a demo a little bit later, and we'll see that every single entity, every file has the information available to it that says this is exactly which accounts have access and what type of access they have. And have they accessed it is the other thing, right? We can see that they have accessed it. So a lot of really good insights into some of this stuff. And this is again building to that total cyber resilience where we're doing our battle testing with our clean room recovery that we talked about a few weeks ago. But really focusing on that awareness, understanding where our data is currently, and how we can protect it is really what we're focused on with risk analysis. So let's get a little bit more specific, Alex. Let's talk about, what we are doing with risk analysis, what we're bringing to the table, and really what the use case is and how we can leverage this for our organizations.
Yeah, so I can jump in here and thanks, Patrick. There's really kind of three main pillars, and this is what our product team really thought about when they built this solution. Oftentimes it wasn't just, customers are coming to us, they say, hey, you're protecting our data, but data governance is a huge piece for us, right? So that first component is visibility. When you're thinking about compliance and audits, it's what type of risk do I have out there and kind of what exists within my data, right? So that's step number one. Then step number two is once you have visibility into that data and right, what risks, what sits within those, storage systems, for example, then it becomes how do we work with our security teams, our compliance teams to build out security controls, right? So that's step number two, define the security controls. And then finally, and I'll show this in the demo, is how do we then actually implement them? How do we track it? How do we go in and look at a dashboard and understand kind of what sensitive data we have, and then actually make steps to action it depending on kind of what that scenario is?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point there, Alex, is that this isn't, again, another not one of those magic buttons that Anthony talked about earlier, right? This is allowing us the insight into our data to make those intelligent decisions, to remediate risk, and to create and implement those controls so that they are effective and that we have high fidelity and confidence in our data. We wanted to talk a little bit about like a real life use case, and Alex brought us this to the table. So really, some good stuff here, Alex. We want to talk about this use case, how we brought this to bear for this organization, and really what the outcomes were.
Yeah, so and kind of as a follow-up, right? It's you can talk about something in theory, but what does it actually look like in practice?
Right.
And so risk analysis and data governance, it goes across industries. And it's really, I've seen customers across industries use it. One industry that I see oftentimes is in the healthcare industry, right? So this customer, for compliance reasons, they had to store health records across multiple NAS devices, right? And the first
Mhm.
step for them was understanding, kind of what risks do we have? And Anthony brought this up at the start of the call. He said, if in the event inevitably it happens, if you are attacked, right, a bad actor gets access to your environment, what are they getting access to? Like what is at risk, right? And so that's kind of the first step. Understand, health record details, our social security numbers in there, health insurance details, what is in that data. So that was the first step is kind of that was the challenge they faced.
Yeah.
Um, and then in terms of the outcome and what resulted from that is, they worked with their security team, compliance team, and leveraged the Commvault platform to based on the entities that they've defined. All right, here's what we are searching and scanning our data for. They had visibility into that data. They implemented the security controls, and then they were able to track and remediate that. And an important kind of final call out there is, right, the great thing is, you have a tool, you're using Commvault to protect your data, right? You've already defined your retention policies, you've already ensured you're in compliance. Instead of going to bringing in another tool, going across different sources, doing it all under one roof to include that data governance piece was a huge benefit and a huge value in this scenario.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that, during the demo, we're going to start to talk about plans, right? We talk about plans with backup and recovery all the time too, but we're talking about plans when we're talking about data classification and things like that as well. So really, again, a component piece of a greater whole that we're bringing to bear from a total data protection and resilience standpoint. Um, you know, Healthcare is a great place to talk about compliance and regulatory requirements because the HIPAA is very front and center, right? And GDPR in Europe is really easy to talk about. And all those things, all those entities are predefined within our workflows, within risk analysis. But, we also have the ability to create custom entities and allow ourselves to identify PII that's unique to our organization because not everybody is a healthcare organization. We have different regulatory requirements for everybody.
Yeah, I like that you can have, again, we talked about RBAC controls, how to integrate other departments into this. Again, it's not just a backup platform, but the idea is that you have access to all the data sets in one single place, source of truth. How do you give access to somebody to be able to go through and look at the sensitive data? They can't, it doesn't have to be the backup admin. Again, it's not your responsibility in that role. But the organization can put somebody in that role where they can go through the sensitive data, look through it, and say, you know what, this is not right. And they can take a remediation action on it. And not only that, they can trigger a workflow that says, you know what, I don't think this is right, but it's above my pay grade. Somebody else needs to approve it first before it gets moved, it gets removed from a certain data set. And so that's cool too. Again, the more you can split up these functions, the more checks and balances you have as well. And
Mhm.
again, getting it off of the backup admin's plate to go to court or do these things that, again, it's not in their wheelhouse. It's not something that they should be responsible for. So bring in those right department users.
Yeah, really good point. I think one of the other things that from a risk analysis standpoint that we fail to talk about enough and a lot is it affects our ability to recover in the event of a cyber incident as well. If we have the ability to mitigate risk by moving data into siloed locations where we know they're protected, or maybe there's a subset of data that is super important, we want to make sure that it's easily recoverable. If we can offload that, ensure it doesn't have anybody has access to it or anybody has accessed it, it becomes easier for us to shrink that data profile and bring it up a lot quicker. The other things, that the tie-ins to file systems and everything like this, it's not just, some of those remediation steps is the ability to remediate on the spot. You don't have to go in and have your file admins making these changes, these compliance pieces. We can adjust on the fly using those API calls and everything that brings to the table.
I also like the quick, what happens if inherited permissions are not always easy to figure out.
Oh yeah.
And saying, oh, I should change these permissions. You can also undo the remediation because again, you're the backup environment and you can roll back those, oh, I changed this. Uh-oh, somebody's yelling. I can roll it back. So
Yeah, good stuff. All right. So just wanted to touch base real quick before we get into the demo. From a differentiators and an innovator standpoint, we're talking about Commvault as a platform here, right? We're not talking about just risk analysis because that component is tied into the greater ecosystem that Commvault brings to the bear. And we're talking about the broadest coverage of data protection available in the industry. We're talking about being able to do clean room recovery operations that we discussed last week providing that unified platform that gives us insight into our data, not only from those live systems that we can scan with risk analysis, but we can also scan our backup data with risk analysis and offload the use case so that we're not affecting our primary systems either. I don't even know, we haven't even discussed that yet, but the fact that we don't need our primary systems to remediate these, or to at least identify in identify these issues is really great.
Yeah, less load on the production environment, like to your point. Take a
Mhm.
backup, and then we can look at that data set, offload that IO demand.
Yeah. And then we'll talk about threat scan, synthetic recovery, forensic recovery, and all these things next week, or excuse me, in 2 weeks, when we have our fifth and final of these. I'm really excited for this one. We heard a lot of really great stuff about threat scan at Commvault Shift. And we've heard something, we heard a lot of great stuff about risk analysis too, that we're going to get into a little bit about after the demo. But we are at about 20 minutes in, so I wanted to hand the reins over to Alex so he could get some eyes on how this functionality works, what it looks like for your team and your organization, and what those remediation steps really kind of look like.
Perfect. So I will go ahead and share my screen. The obligatory is everyone seeing my screen right now? Are you guys seeing the Commvault platform?
Gotcha.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to be conscious of time. I won't go too far into this, but I did want to kind of give you guys a glimpse of what this actually looks like in the platform. I'm going to focus on sensitive data governance. Remember that risk analysis and data insights as a whole, like it's much broader, right? We have file storage optimization, understand who has access to those files, kind of do we have any duplicate files, those components. I won't go into that, but I just want to call that out at the start.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go ahead and dive into sensitive data governance. The first component is, and Anthony and Patrick talked about these entities, right? So I want to talk about that. I'm going to show you specific to healthcare, but I also kind of want to talk to like the fact that you can build custom entities, right? Every company is different. Every requirement for data governance is different. So you can use regex and build your own custom entities depending on what that scenario is. So first and foremost, the logical kind of container for all of this is a plan, right? So, let's just call this test 27. We just need two components to run this, right? An index server and a content analyzer. Depending on the size of the environment, you can put that on the same server, different servers. Um, and then comes the entities. Basically, what are we searching this data for, right? So I gave that healthcare example. So let's type in here, pull up health. And maybe I want to use health insurance claim numbers, right? I want to check those health records for that specific entity, right? Understand what my risk is there. And then the final components here is, you can go ahead and schedule this, right? So it is truly a set it and forget it. And then you can go and track and, give access. We talked about RBAC, give access to your security team and give them access to only this dashboard, for example, right? So we would define that here. And then the last call out is we can run this on the backups or what we call source data, right? And that's something you would select from the storage pool. All right, here's basically the backups we want to run this against.
Very cool.
So that is that initial setup. Now let's kind of take a look at what this actually looks like. What is an example? How do I search across my data, right? So I'm going to go into one of these projects that we created. Um, Important call out at the start, and actually I'll go into that in a second. So first, let's talk through high level dashboard. What are we seeing right here? So as you can see, data sources, we have analyzed basically a file server, right? And you can see based on the entities we've defined, there is 95 sensitive documents. Based on what we've defined, we've said, all right, across these entities, you guys have this risk within your file server, right? So giving you visibility into the environment. So once we know that, then the next step is like, how do we actually action this, right? So how do we put these security controls in place and then action them? So the first is giving visibility, right? Being able to see kind of what we have out there. And then, the next step is, all right, how do we actually remediate that? So if we dive in here, as this gives a deeper dive specific for this file source, this file server. And I can go ahead and review. Maybe I want to search, just for passwords, right? So what I've done here, basically anything that has been flagged according to this entity we've defined, right? Now I see all these files that have been flagged as sensitive, right? And you would define how we, set sensitive, moderate, high, etc. Once I've done that, and this is what Anthony talked about, right? Now I can take actions on this data. So maybe it's a false positive. Maybe I want to ignore it. Or maybe I want to actually go ahead and delete this file, right? So I can delete it from the source. I can delete it from backup, right? I can also delete, all 13 documents, only one document. It's completely up to you. And this is where you can go ahead and create a review request, right? So to Anthony's point, maybe I'm not sure about this. I think we should take this action, but I want someone else to review it. That's where you're going to leverage these reviews.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And on a delete, we always recommend that you have second set of eyes on a delete when we're talking
100%.
about data.
100%. And then the last thing to call out is, maybe we want to encrypt that data so we can move it to a different destination path. So that is the summary kind of what we have here. And let me go back and show you guys one last thing, and then I will wrap up here. In terms of data sources, what you're able to add, we can scan file systems, object storage, Exchange, OneDrive, and databases.
Yeah, and
So that
that's where we're starting to see some innovation, right? Anthony, we talked a little bit about with some of the teams. They had an Ask the Experts component of the Shift event last week. And Anthony, you talked about sensitive data governance and an acquisition called Sartori and what that's going to bring to the table here.
Yeah, so Satori, to Patrick's point, it's a company that was a standalone that Commvault acquired this last year. And what we're showing right now is the current form of risk analysis where we're scanning the, like we said, what is it? Unstructured files, right?
Hmm.
Satori brings a different component to it. It has an AI component, auto learning, agentive AI, but it's also doing where we can scan structured sources, so databases and other things for specific types of sensitive data. There was another use case I saw with it that was pretty slick where companies are trying to figure out how they're using AI, whether it's Copilot, ChatGPT, Grok, things like that, and make their, job more streamlined, right? And so they showed a use case where you might have sensitive data that somebody's going to copy and paste into one of these, like into Copilot to do a summarization or some type of output. But that sensitive data, just because they have access to that sensitive data, doesn't mean that the AI bot or the output should also have that. And so you can put
Hmm.
policies in place to redact data where, social security number gets placed into it for 100 employees. Well, all of that data actually gets redacted out automatically. And so this sits between your data sources, your sensitive data, and those AI engines. So,
That's a that's really cool, Anthony. And it reminds me of a component of the Commvault base product that hardly anybody takes advantage of, and it's the ability to obfuscate that data from index and browsing. If you have sensitive data that your backup team shouldn't have access to, they shouldn't probably be able to browse it either.
right.
You can
Yeah.
obfuscate that data within that system as well. A lot of great stuff. That's why we like Commvault. That's why we think this component solutions are not better than a greater source of the whole.